All right, ladies and gentlemen. So we have started a new unit. Last lesson we talked about Rome. Okay, we're going to talk about how Rome's going to start as this tiny little city, and it's going to grow to this enormous empire. And we got to talking about the founding myth of Rome last time with Romulus and Remus and the wolf and the fighting and the gods and goddesses and all that good stuff. You guys were working on your own founding myths for Harrisburg. If you still haven't finished it, get that to me as soon as possible so that I can give you some points. Today is what I'm going to call the copycat lesson. Okay, because we're going to talk about a couple different groups, excuse me, and how they copied off of each other and improved on each other's ideas. So, we talked about the Romans and the Latins and a couple small groups living in Italy, okay, a couple thousand years ago. And that's where the Romans, this next civilization we're going to talk about, that's where they get their start. Now, also living in that area at the time was a group called the Etruscans. Real quick, before I get too far ahead, if you want to click through this Nearpod on your own, here's the code right here, VL6QF, okay? It's highlighted right there. Pause the video if you need to write it down. That'll allow you to click through on your own. It is posted on the Canvas page as well, so you can always check out that link. But anyways, the Etruscans, they were living in Italy around the same time as the Latins and the Romans. And the Etruscans, they really liked the idea of the Greeks. They borrowed a lot of their ideas. Specifically, they borrowed their alphabet. Okay, their alphabet. Now, that's not the only thing the Etruscans are going to copy off the Greeks. Okay, but it is one of the more important ones because we're going to see that later. A little quiz here. Who do the Etruscans borrow their alphabet from? It's the Greeks. Okay, it's the Greeks. Not the Egyptians. Remember, the Egyptians, they used the hieroglyphs or the picture writing. But we see the Etruscans borrow the Greeks' alphabet, so the letters. Moving on here. Nice job. We got that correct. We had a small discussion in class today is, do you think that language and alphabet are the same thing? We kind of got to talking about how you can have written language, but you can also have oral language. So spoken language, it doesn't have letters. It has sounds, right, to represent meaning. But alphabet is specifically the written form, right, the visual. So we talked about those differences. The Etruscans are often considered Italy's first highly civilized people. Their nickname is people from the sea because they did a lot of trading, okay, a lot of sailing. But they were also farmers because remember we talked about Italy being good for farming. Miners and merchants, so they made goods and sold it and traded. They had a very strong army. They perfected and borrowed some of the Greek battle formations, specifically the Greek phalanx. So first they copied the Greek letters. Now they're copying the Greek military ideas, the phalanx specifically. Now the one thing the Etruscans did a little bit better than a lot of their enemies was they had a secret weapon. The secret weapon, it's going to seem kind of silly to us, it's actually shoes. Okay, the Etruscans wore shoes, which helped them get better footing on rough, hilly ground. Right? You're not distracted with your feet. Now here's the phalanx, was developed by the Greeks. Okay, you get kind of a tight box formation, link your shields together. You've got really long spears that you reach over top and you stab with. And the Greeks were excellent at this, and the Etruscans are going to copy them, just like they copied the language, not the language, the alphabet. All right, so what else did they copy? Real quick, open-ended review question here. Advantages and disadvantages of the phalanx. So the advantages is it's really strong. Because of the interlocking shields, you can protect yourself really well. The long spears allows you to attack your enemies before they get you. The disadvantage, it moves kind of slow because everybody's blocked together. And also, it can only attack one direction. So if people are sneaking up behind you or from the sides, it's kind of hard to shift. All right, so the Etruscans, because of all their trading, they do get very wealthy. They start to dominate the other small groups, specifically the Latins. Remember, the Romans were part of the Latins. And the Etruscans, they're going to develop a social structure. They're going to have upper class landowners, wealthy people, religious leaders. Middle class are going to be the farmers and the people doing the trading. And then they did have slaves and prisoners of war, so they are going to have a lower class. The Etruscans, they were polytheistic. And they are going to borrow the same gods and goddesses as the Greeks. So they copy the Greek letters. They copy the Greek military formations. Now they copy the Greek religion. Okay, the Etruscans are copycats. As we move on here, Okay, obviously we see that they took the ancient Greek gods and goddesses. Okay, Zeus, Hera, Ares, Aphrodite. We could keep going. Okay, and they just give them different names. They give them different names. So they come back. They're going to have eventually what we call Roman names or Latin names. Apollo actually stays the same. We've got Diana, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Minerva, Neptune, Venus, and so on. Okay, so they're going to come back. I actually have set up here, it's a matching. So basically, you can click through and try to match up the Greek names of the gods and goddesses to the Roman names, okay, or the Latin names. So if you want to do that, that's kind of a fun activity. You can mess around with that. They are going to make some advancements of their own, though. Okay, specifically in architecture, they're going to start working with arches and building arches to make their buildings structurally very strong. They're going to come up with gladiator games, which we'll talk about in a week or two. The Romans are going to start borrowing from the Etruscans. Okay, so the Etruscans, we know that they were copying from the Greeks. The Romans are now going to copy from the Etruscans. So really, the Romans are copying from the Greeks. They borrow their alphabet. They borrow their religion. They start to borrow some ideas from the military, but not all of them. And they're going to start setting up their cities like the Etruscans did. So we've got the Etruscans who are copycats of the Greeks. We've got the Romans who are copycats of the Etruscans. Everybody's copying the Greeks. Okay. The Romans are very famous for their use of arches, okay, in their architecture. It's going to basically where you can make these curved kind of entranceways. It's very strong because all of this pressure is going to go on one central point, which is the keystone. And we're going to see this a lot, even in modern architecture, which we'll see here in a second. Okay. We talked about this spot. This is the bridge downtown. Okay. We see this on a couple of the bridges downtown, arches. This comes the whole way from ancient times, the whole way from the Etruscans, right? And eventually the Romans are going to perfect this. So we're going to see that a lot. They also, the Romans were some of the first people to use concrete. They built lots of roads. And they built their roads for military purposes because they wanted to be able to get their troops and supplies all over their land very quickly. But then they will also use it for trade. So they're going to get pretty wealthy. And actually that map real quick, this is all the roads, the network of roads that the Romans built. So they built roads all over Europe. They travel very fast. They built lots of bridges to go over rivers, go over kind of valleys, those kind of places. Made them out of stones, utilizing the arch that we just talked about. They also created aqueducts. These are basically above-ground water tubes that use gravity to take water from the mountain springs and take it the whole way to cities where they might not have water. So that's a huge achievement of the Romans. This is actually a VR picture of an aqueduct. It's still standing today, even though it's thousands of years old. It's still standing. We're going to talk a little bit more about Roman cities, but they're very intentional about how they plan them, how they set them up. In fact, they started cities. They often use common blueprints, set up their cities in grids, kind of like modern cities. And so we see basically the big point from today is we have the Greeks with their military, with their alphabet, with their religion, right? The Etruscans are copying off them. And then the Romans, who are living near the Etruscans in Italy, are going to start copying off the Etruscans. So we've got a bunch of copycats kind of right in a row. The Romans are going to take all these ideas from the Greeks and the Etruscans. They're going to borrow them. And we're going to see throughout the next couple weeks, they're going to make them better. Okay, so that's where we're headed. We're going to see what these copycats, these Romans, end up doing next.